When looking back at the landscape of gaming in the 90s, the collectathon genre was popping off hard. Like a magnesium fire, the collectathon burned brightly, with many excellent platformers releasing during this period of time. But it was a fire that burned only for a brief while. Mascot platformers were a dime a dozen before the conception of the Z-axis. Once Sonic the Hedgehog zipped onto the scene in '91, it seemed that every other video game company wanted a piece of the action. Some of these games were good, some not so much. But when Mario 64 dropped in 1996, the script was flipped once again. Going forward, it was clear that this was going to be how games were made now. 3D platformers were no longer a pipe dream like they were nearly 6 years ago at the beginning of the decade, and Super Mario 64 showed the world how this shit was done. To say that this game changed everything would be an understatement, and you all already know that. But more interestingly, Super Mario 64 inadvertently birthed a new subgenre of platformers, the collectathon. Now, there's a strong argument to be made here that Mario 64 isn't even a collectathon in the first place, as the only real MacGuffin in this game are the Power Stars. By most people's approximation, the difference between a collectathon and your standard 3D platformer is based on how many things there are to collect. Super Mario 64 is more interested in the athletic platforming and exploration of these levels with Mario's insane kit and caboodle of moves. Collectathons, by comparison, are characterized as having more emphasis on, well, collecting. Usually there's a colorful cast of quirky characters and environments to offset the monotony of grabbing a bunch of little MacGuffins. I believe that the best collectathons leverage the act of grabbing these said MacGuffins with an innate sense of flow and inertia, and a satisfaction that is provided by seeing numbers go up and checking off to-do lists. Be that as it may, Super Mario 64 is still an honorary entry in this genre. It revolutionized how these games were designed. During the 8 and 16-bit era, side-scrolling platformers usually had a simple, linear, point A to point B design, with the exception of games like Metroid and Castlevania II: Simon's Quest, amongst others. In most of these games, you run and jump through the start of a level to the finish line, but even then there's a little bit more nuance to it than what I'm making it out to be. For instance, even though Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World are both side-scrolling platformers, I would argue that their modus operandi differs greatly. Super Mario Bros. 3 is far more fast-paced and kinetic. Levels are shorter and provide an immediate challenge to overcome, whereas Super Mario World is slower, more premeditative. The main thrust of Super Mario World is the exploration and getting immersed in the dinosaur world itself, finding secret exits and hidden levels. But when Super Mario 64 rocked onto the scene in '96, shit was different. No longer are you simply running and jumping from start to finish. Super Mario 64 provided players with these big sandboxes for you to run and jump around and explore. Each level had a handful of different objectives and things to accomplish within them, but the end goal was collecting an individual Power Star to progress. And this right here is where the collectathon spun off from. This paradigm shift in game design was more likely done out of necessity as opposed to being a stylistic game design choice. In the primordial days of 3D game development, it was easier to design and create larger levels with many things to do within them and collect within them, instead of creating several unique levels with their own assets and textures and whatnot, as seen in the 8 and 16-bit era. And to this day, the king of all of them is Rareware's Banjo-Kazooie for the Nintendo 64. I feel like even the most jaded, apathetic person can still concede that Banjo-Kazooie is a fantastic game. This is one of those games that has almost no animosity in the gaming culture. Rareware was one of the GOATs back in the 90s, and they had the Midas touch with every genre they tackled, whether it be fighting games, first-person shooters, kart racers, and especially platformers, which was their bread and butter during the decade. There's a strong argument to be made that Banjo-Kazooie is the best 3D platformer of its time. I certainly think that it is. Possibly even better than Super Mario 64, but again, that's subject to opinion. Where Super Mario 64 excels is with the movement and the spectacle of being able to do crazy-ass flips, long jumps, and kicks with Mario. Banjo-Kazooie, on the other hand, had an immaculate rhythm and flow with its level design and game sensibilities. Top that off with a dollop of memorable characters, an amazing score by Grant Kirkhope, and that iconic dry English sense of humor that Rareware was known for. And you've got yourself one hell of a package with Banjo. Let me circle back to the topic of level design. This is what makes Banjo-Kazooie so good even all these years later. While some other platformers have shown their age here and there if you try to go back and play them nowadays, Banjo-Kazooie is still just as good now as it was on the N64 back in '98, especially if you're playing the fantastic remaster by 4J Studios for the Xbox. A key reason why Banjo is so damn good, in my opinion, is, the level design. Banjo has such a rhythmic sense of flow and inertia, as I've mentioned several times already. Levels are very concise, with musical notes leading you forward like a trail of breadcrumbs. In addition to the musical notes, you get 2 honeycomb pieces within a level. The Jinjos, one of the greatest creatures to ever grace video game history, collect 5 of these guys and you get a Jiggy. And finally, you have the Jiggies themselves. It's time to get jiggy with it, Big Willy style. These are the big shiny MacGuffin of Banjo-Kazooie. 10 Jiggies within each stage, and unlike Super Mario 64, where collecting an individual Power Star ejects you from the stage that you're currently playing, in Banjo-Kazooie you stay in the level, and you can one-take Jake it, with the exception of a little bit of backtracking between Breezy Peak and Gobi's Valley. There are 11 worlds total in Banjo-Kazooie, 9 if you don't count the opening Spiral Mountain tutorial level, and the hub world Grunty's Lair. Speaking of Spiral Mountain, it's such a fantastic area. So saturated and colorful, it's just really nice. And it's somewhat forward-thinking for its time as well, because you can skip Bottle's tutorial at the beginning of the game if you so desire. The first level proper is Mumbo's Mountain, and it's a fine crash course to the gameplay loop of Banjo-Kazooie. It's a relatively simple, straightforward level with enough substance to make it engaging for newcomers without overwhelming them. The only thing holding Mumbo's Mountain back for me personally is that replaying this game as many times as I have, it can be a little annoying being stopped and interrupted by the little fellas that you're collecting, but that's not so much of a game breaker as it is a minor inconvenience. Now the second level, Trove Cove. This is where Banjo-Kazooie gets good. If Spiral Mountain and Mumbo's Mountain were designed with the sole purpose of getting your feet wet, Trove Cove throws your ass into the deep end of the swimming pool. Literally. It's demonstrably bigger in scope compared to the previous level, with many branching paths. And much like Mumbo's Mountain, you can do a lot of these tasks however which way you desire. You're dropped into the outskirts of the level on this pier here, and immediately you can hear the iconic sound of a Jinjo below you. So naturally, most players would instinctually jump into the water to save the little guy, and for your heroism and good deeds, you're rewarded with the #1 source of nightmare fuel when I was a kid. Okay, that was hyperbolic. I actually didn't play Banjo-Kazooie until I was a teenager on the Xbox 360, so that previous statement was a complete fabrication. After you touch base with the shore, the training wheels have officially been taken off and you're left to your devices. Want to go fight this hermit crab boss fight first? Go for it. Want to help Captain Blubber retrieve his gold by plundering in the waters of a maroon ship? Go for it. You want to talk to Bottles the Mole on the mast of the ship to retrieve the ability to fly, and then proceed to burn through all of your red feathers the moment you've touched the sky? Absolutely, go for it. You can do whatever you want. And while the scope of the level is quantifiably larger than that of Mumbo's Mountain, like I said earlier, all of the levels in Banjo are still compact enough to where you're not going to be overwhelmed or get lost or frustrated. You're still learning new moves at a steady pace, following the trail of collectible music notes, and of course, saving Jinjos, grabbing Jiggies, and other assortment of MacGuffins. The only thing going against Trove Cove is the lack of a mumbo-jumbo transformation. I think it would have been cool to turn into a shark or a piranha and explore a hypothetical underwater area as an aquatic critter. And can I just say that I love beach levels in these early 3D platformers? The summertime vibes are immaculate. Something about the low poly count and the blurry bilinear map texture work of the N64, it lent itself really well to beach levels in particular. And the music in this level rules. Grant Kirkhope is the goddamn man. I think it's unfortunate that some of Rareware's other composers, such as Robin Beanland, Evelyn Fisher, or Graham Norgate don't get brought up as much as the likes of David Wise or Grant Kirkhope, but Man, Kurt Cope's musical chops are just incredible. I think his whimsical, catchy style fits the vibes of these collectathons to a T. When David Wise produced the score to Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, he did so with a level of nuance and maturity that fit the more realistic atmosphere of those games. Yeah, DKC, at the end of the day, is a side-scrolling platformer about monkeys fighting crocodiles, but the art direction and atmosphere was far more grounded and leveled than that of your Sonics or Marios or Rocket Knights. Kurt Cope also produced the soundtrack to Donkey Kong 64, and I really couldn't see David Wise's music being in this game. You know, providing the score for DK64, Grant's style just fits it so well. And his compositions and arrangements for Banjo-Kazooie are also spectacular. What I'm about to say should really go without saying, but music is such an important part of establishing the tone and atmosphere of a game. Let me show you the beta version of Treasure Trove Cove's music. During development of Banjo-Kazooie, it was known as Hammerhead Beach, and the music provides a completely different atmosphere for this level. Banjo-Kazooie is still the undisputed king of cool in my eyes. Mascot platformers and collectathons are slowly making a comeback, both in the indie scene and, surprisingly, the AAA space. With the release of GTA 3 in the early 2000s, the platforming genre died out for a good while. It wasn't in vogue like it was in the 90s, and I feel like Banjo-Kazooie just hit such a lightning-in-a-bottle creativity and design that no other video games have ever come close to, aside from maybe the first Quake. And I don't think we should necessarily lament the loss of Rareware, because their award-winning run of video games from the 90s will always be playable, whether it's emulation or official ports. And these games are still great to go back to. Some have aged better than others, of course, but games like Killer Instinct, Diddy Kong Racing, and Banjo-Kazooie are still just as good now as they were back in the day. Thank you for watching my video, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.